I have received a request to talk about the Mirage 760 crossover upgrade. So the Mirage 760 is a Canadian speaker. It was made in the 90s, so it's something that's not exactly new, but not totally vintage yet. It's one of those speakers which is now not that frequent, but if you look at it, let's see, just typed it up on eBay. This is how they look like, just like regular big boxes without the screens, the front screens. They look like that. So they have two 8-inch woofers plus a dome tweeter on each side, and they are 2.5-way speakers, so it means that the crossover is splitting them for low frequencies for the two drivers, which operate in parallel, so they work together, the same movement both of them are doing, and of course the dome tweeter is doing the high frequencies. And sometimes when you see speakers like that, it can be three-way. So one could be doing more like a mid-range duty, and the other one is more the bass duty, even though they are the same size. So if they are the same size, it's not the guarantee that they are moving together. So in this case, in the case of the Mirage 760, they are doing their job at the same time. And when you look in the back, they have two ports, so each woofer has its own port and own internal compartment, and they have the connectors on the bottom. The cabinets are completely unremarkable. They are just these non-grass script black boxes, and unfortunately now I have to show you these photos online because my Mirages are now partying out at my buddy's place. So Terry is cranking them up, and that's the benefit of having audio friends, because we can, share with each other and just get more experience. And then if you look at the price, this is what an asking price for them is right now, $500. I have seen them go for cheaper, maybe 300. Sometimes it can go higher, 600, whatever. It's around this price if you can find one. It's, I would say, not that frequent that a pair comes up for sale, but when it does, I really recommend you to grab them, because for $500 you can buy a pair of speakers that's equivalent to sound quality what you can get today for $10,000. But in this case, when you get them with the original crossovers, they will sound tired, old, sick, not very impressive. They will sound like something you would get for $500. But after you upgrade their crossovers, they totally transform to speakers that really severely challenge our current new speaker designs. And before I go into those details on what I did to the crossovers, I just show like a little review online from one of the forums called Audio Karma. It's a really great forum if you don't know about it, and someone is here tells his experience with the Mirage, that it has a super nice Wi-Fi tweeter, bass is wonderful, deep and very crisp. Fit and finish is something akin to a bunker, not amazingly pretty or fancy, but they weigh almost 70 pounds each, lot of internal bracing, and the person highly recommends anyone who sees one, snap them up. And they have only a tiny sticker, so the M760 label usually falls off them, so it's kind of a little harder to identify. So you have to identify by the looks of them. And they were designed, engineered and built in Canada. And I concur with this person. He's asking, has anyone been impressed with these, and heck yeah, I've been super impressed with them. They are totally amazing speakers, and probably one of the best deals out there if you are looking for something to, you know, just to tweak, to rebuild the crossover, just really minimal work required with it, and they will just sound totally amazing. They can be the last pair of speakers you ever get. And let's see something. So these are the measurements of my Mirages. So I did an impedance and impedance phase measurement. So you see the blue line, that's the impedance curve of the Mirage, and here the red one, that's the impedance phase. So when we look at the impedance phase, that line in the middle, that's 0 degrees, and if it's at 0 degrees, it means that it's handling 100% of the amplifier's power and turning it into music signal. And when the phase is not in the center line but going away from it, it means that it can take up less than 100% of the power that the amp throws at it. And the more it goes away from the center line, the least amount of power it can handle. However, when you look, the phase response is super benign. So here that's minus 180, plus 180 degrees, and it's just staying all the way at the very center. So I have not written those numbers down, but when I look at the numbers themselves, they are within plus and minus 32 degrees phase. So that's extremely benign, which means that these speakers really are very easy on your amplifier. And let's look at the impedance curve. So what does the impedance curve tell us? Let's look first around 100 Hertz. So at 100 Hertz we see that big peak, and that's the self-resonant frequency of the woofers. So that's why the impedance there at around 95 Hertz is so high, because that's where the driver cones self-resonate. So it means that if you add just a tiny bit of power, they tend to oscillate there, and that's why they just want to do their own dance show, and they don't really want to take any notice of the amplifier. So they eat up little power from the amp at that point. So that's why their impedance is really high. But as we go away from the self-resonant frequency, we go towards the bass, then the impedance drops a lot, and that drops because here that's the port taking over, and there at 40 Hertz, so 39.7 Hertz, that's the impedance minimum, that's the port tuning frequency, and there let me see if I can get it sharper, that's almost 5 ohms, 4.983 ohms is the impedance, and 21 degrees off phase. So that's super benign. So it means that basically when you look at the impedance of the speaker, so this is specified as an 8 ohms speaker, but that's just a number, 8 ohms, because you know, when you are looking for speakers, they either slap a sticker on it, 4 ohms, 8 ohms, or 16 ohms. But in reality, this is what tells you what the actual impedance of the speaker is. And here, as we learn, the actual impedance minimum of the speaker is virtually 5 ohms, and you have to divide it by 0.8, and that's the actual impedance. So when you calculate that, that's 6.23 ohms. So that's the real load that the speaker represents for your amplifier. Because how we specify real load, or how the industry specifies it, is that real load is that point that when we look at the lowest impedance point, that's 80% of the nominal load. So 6.23 is the nominal, and 4.93983 ohms, that's 80% of 6.23. So it means that if your amplifier has a 6 ohms tap, then that's the perfect fit for the Mirage. If your amp has 4 ohms and 8 ohm taps, then it's for you. You can choose. Try out both of them, because it's right in between the two. And let's see at the other parts of this impedance curve is when we go for higher frequencies. You see, this is like, what is that? That's 500 hertz is here. So around 350 hertz we have a little resonant peak there. I don't know what's causing that. But then as we climb up, these parts, that's the crossover. So those peaks there are caused by partially by the tweeter's impedance increasing as the frequency drops, and the woofer's impedance increasing as frequency rises, plus the two crossovers, the low pass and the high pass crossovers resonances create these peaks. And when you look at this peak here, that's the tweeter's self-resonant peak is up there. So this is what we can learn from this curve. And other than that, when you look at the brochure, the Mirage 760 is described as an 89 dB sensitive speaker. So that's pretty much on the lower side, and they specify 30 Hertz at -3 dB level. So eventually, based on these numbers, that it's only 89 dB sensitive, you would expect that you need a high power amplifier is mandatory to drive it. However, this curve tells us that that the dB specification is not enough. It tells that the impedance phase is super benign, so it means that you need less power to make it work. Because, for example, if the impedance phase was much worse here, then it could mean that the amp is only eating up 10% of the amplifier's power. So, and in that case, then you would need a 10 times bigger amp. Now we have really tiny divergences, so it means that these speakers are usually eating up at least 80% of the power that your amp throws at them. But when you look at other speakers, the divergence from optimal phase is often much greater, especially in the bass region. That's where it becomes problematic, and that's why you need higher power amps and amps with high damping factors, because when the phase is really off, then basically your speakers are resisting your amplifier. That's why you need high damping factor. That's why you need a lot of power to keep the bass in control. Otherwise you get flabby bass. Not here, because here both the impedance curve is really benign. It doesn't dip like to 3 ohms or silly shorts like that, but it stays upwards of 5 ohms at all times. So it's really perfect if you have a 6 ohm tap, and your 8 ohms taps will be happy driving it, and 4 ohms super happy. And let me just tell you what I was using to drive them. I was using my single-ended no feedback amplifier to drive the Mirages, and those little amps cranked out about 2 watts, maybe just a little under 2 watts into the Mirages, which are officially 89 dB sensitive. And guess what? It had phenomenal bass, like super controlled bass. I could rock out Cranberries concert at a volume that was enjoyable, and really brought me back those days when I was in university years, and we went to my buddy's rock concert, and then he was drumming there, and there was a punk band coming up, and the Cranberries CDs really carry that ambience that you are there in the dungeon in a club and there's live music going on. But it was only the Mirage with the 2-watt single-handed amp, no feedback, that gave back that feeling that it's happening right here. There's a concert in my room. I tried listening to it with 100-watt solid-state amps. It gave back the recording as a poorly done, over mixed meh, and with really poor top end. But with the Mirage 89 dB, which should be nowhere enough for a 2-watt amplifier to drive, it gave me loud Cranberries concerts. I was just awesome dancing to it. It was so good. So now let's look at what the crossovers are, and maybe now we are going into 15 minutes plus, so I take this as a second part of this video. Let's make it into a 2-part series.